So great to be here. I love coming to this congregation and preaching for you guys. You're always so welcoming, not just to me, but to my family as well. We appreciate that. And I hope that I can be encouraging to you this morning with my lesson. So the title of my lesson this morning is God's Perspective. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is just because of the craziness that's going on in the world, right? I hope it's not just me, but I look at the things that are going on in the world and I think, wow, it's just getting wild out there. And not wild in a good way, wild in a bad way. And every once in a while I have to just take a step back and realize that there's a lot of things that are not going to be in my control. I can't do anything about them. Yes, it is looking bad, but I have a God and I have a Savior who has taken care of those things for me so that I don't have to worry about them. And that's really what I want to express to you this morning. We're going to be, our main text is going to be Revelation chapter 12. I'm going to have it above on the slides, but you know, if you want to look at it in your own translation, that'd be great. Before I get into the lesson, I just want to mention, you know, throughout my life, I have kind of shied away from the book of Revelation for obvious reasons. There's a lot of different interpretations, and people can, you know, get a little too dogmatic and down in the weeds in Revelation, and there's some really heretical and bad views of Revelation that have you know, come up from various people, and I've always just, you know, I don't want to get into that stuff, and so I never really looked into the book of Revelation a lot, and that was to my detriment. All of God's word is important for us, and recently I've been reading the book, studying it, and I don't claim to know everything or to have everything figured out, but it's just such a beautiful book. So beautiful. The pictures that it paints are amazing. And there's some great lessons. And I want to share one of those lessons that I think, Revelation 12 is quickly becoming one of my favorite chapters in all of the Bible. And I hope you'll understand why it's so, why I find it so encouraging after this lesson. So if you have your Bibles, please turn to Revelation chapter 12. Now, I want to give you, real quickly here, a couple of notes on, make sure okay, we're going. So just a couple of notes for the book of Revelation. So these are kind of a few things that have helped me in interpreting Revelation. Revelation often offers two different perspectives on the same thing. I tend to call it like a heavenly perspective and an earthly perspective. That's why the title of the lesson is God's Perspective, right? It's easy for us to understand the earthly or our own perspective, right? That's just what comes naturally to us. What we have to do, though, sometimes is we have to step back and look at God's perspective on the same situation. Now, Revelation oftentimes will give us both perspectives in a very short time frame. So, one example is the church at Smyrna, right? So, at the beginning of the first couple chapters, John is writing to 7 churches. And he will describe some of the things that are going on with these churches. To the church in Smyrna, he says that outwardly they look poor, right? They're not rich people. Okay, it's a poor congregation. That's the earthly perspective. That's what we see. That's the experience that they live in their life, right? They don't have a lot of physical things. But there's a different perspective on those people. God calls them rich. Okay, why are they rich? Because they have a lot of things? Because they are well taken care of physically? No. We know that's not the case, that they're experiencing hard times and they're poor, but they're rich because they're rich in the blessings that they have in Christ. So, Revelation loves to do this. It loves to give the two different perspectives. Just going through those 7 churches, we're going to see that a lot of times. He also tells the church in Smyrna that the people that are opposing you, they look like they're Jews, right? There was a lot of Jewish and Christian tension throughout the New Testament. And the Jews would oftentimes oppose the Christians. But God says, hey, look, these people that are opposing you, it's not just they're Jews, they're Satan's synagogue. And he says that because, look, anybody who opposes God, whether they are knowingly doing it in service to Satan or not, doesn't really matter. They end up being a servant of Satan. And that's how God looks at it. Another example would be the church in Sardis. They have a reputation of life. But God says, look, I know what people think of when they see you. They think that you're full of life and that you have all these blessings, but I know the truth. I know that you are dead. Wow. Right? So we see that God gives these two different perspectives all throughout the book of Revelation. I have some more here. I'm going to skip past them because I don't want to belabor the point. But we see this often in the book of Revelation. All right, the second note that I want to mention up front to kind of help you understand how Revelation does stuff is Revelation likes to have this, I call it an apparent paradox. So a paradox is like a contradiction. It's something that just can't be. And I call it an apparent paradox because it's not actually like a paradox, but at first glance it appears that way. When you dig into it, you come to understand it. So an example of that, and before I give you the examples, these are often introduced by the two different things are often introduced by the word or the idea of hearing and then seeing. Okay, so you'll see this a lot in the book of Revelation. So the first example that I have, this is one of my favorite. This is out of Revelation chapter 5. It's a very famous passage, and we all know it. But there's this scroll, and it's sealed. And John's having this vision, and it's announced that no one's able to open this scroll. And so John's, he's like, he's beat up because he's like, we want to know what's in the scroll, right? That's the whole purpose of Revelation, is to reveal, right? And he's saying the scroll can't be opened. And then it says he heard that there was someone who was able to open it. And the description of that person that was able to open it was a lion, right? This victorious lion, the lion of the tribe of Judah. We know that as Jesus. The symbolism is obvious. But he says he hears that the lion of the tribe of Judah is able to open the scroll. And then the very next thing is he says, and I looked. Right? So there's this idea of like hearing that the lion is able to open it. Then he looks, and behold, it's what? It's not a lion. It's a slain lamb. Right? But that's what's so powerful about the images that are in Revelation, right? Is Jesus is a lion because he's conquered, because he's victorious. But how did he conquer? How is he victorious? He's victorious through his death on the cross. And so Revelation is beautiful because it gives us both of those things, right? It acknowledges that Jesus is the victor and that he's conquered and he's overcome, but it tells us how he did it, all within just images and pictures. Okay, another example of that would be the 144,000. This is a common theme. It's mentioned twice, actually, in the book of Revelation in two different chapters. But it says those that are sealed in the book of Revelation, so it says he heard the number of those who had been sealed, 144,000. It gives some descriptions, it's 12 from this tribe, 12,000 from this tribe, 12,000 from this tribe. And then it gets down to verse 9, and he says, again, I looked. Right, so first he hears the number, it's 144,000, and then it says he looks. Is it 144,000 anymore? No, it's an innumerable host. It's a great multitude that cannot be counted, as the New King James, which is what I like to use, describes it as. It's this great multitude that can't be counted. And so it seems like a paradox, but when you understand the symbolism of Revelation and the idea of 12 being a complete, full number of all of God's people, then you go, okay, well, that's why it uses these things. So just wanted to let you know that up front. So those are my notes on Revelation. All right, having said that, let's get into the text. Revelation chapter 12. I'm going to start with verse 1, and we're going to read through verse 6 right now. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour the child as soon as it was born. So she bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Oh, so it's an awesome picture that's been painted right there. I love it. Two things that I want to talk about on this passage. First, the passage just does this incredible job of painting the picture of this insurmountable obstacle, right? If you're reading and following along, you're like, wow, what is this woman going to do? Right? What's the image that's painted? I went to one of these AI generators, and I was like, I was trying to describe to it what I wanted. Anyway, that's just a side note there. But this is the picture that I got eventually after a few iterations of trying to do this. You've got this pregnant woman, right? She's about to give birth. She's not just pregnant. She's like right there. Like labor is coming. She's not in a position to do much of anything as far as defending herself or trying to get away from this dragon or trying to protect the child that's going to be born. For her, it's just, look, I just got to get through this. And then you've got a dragon standing right in front of her, ready to, is there anything that this woman can do? No. If the dragon wants to eat that child, the dragon's going to eat that child. That's the way it looks for us, right? I mean, what is she going to do? Nothing. It looks insurmountable. It looks like nothing can be done. Now, here's the really cool part. This is why I love Revelation. God just casually dismisses this with one little sentence, right? He sets up this picture of this insurmountable obstacle. Like you just can't imagine how it could be overcome. And then God just says, and her child was caught up to God in his throne. Like he just does it. Like we think, and you can imagine the woman, right? Like put yourself into her shoes. She's thinking, what can I do here? She's thinking, there's nothing I can do. She's thinking she's going to lose. She's going to die. Her child's going to die. And then God just takes care of it. And what I love about this is God doesn't tell you how he takes care of it. Right? He just does it. He doesn't give you the details in the text here. Now, we know the details, right? Because we know the story of Christ. This is obviously talking about Christ. I'm gonna show that here in a second. But we know the story of Christ. We know what he went through in his life. Was it easy? He went through a lot of suffering. He went through temptations, just like we do. You know, Satan took him out in the wilderness and he tested him and tempted him. He went through what we had to experience. He experienced this life. It wasn't any easier for him than it was for us. In fact, I would say it was probably harder, what he had to go through. So that's the earthly perspective is the Gospels, right? All the stuff that he went through. But God's perspective is he just did it. He just caught up his child to the throne and he was saved. And it's all good. And we don't have to worry about it. That's how Revelation describes it. We got 4 Gospels giving you the details, the nitty-gritty details. The nails going into his hands on the cross. The people spitting on him, mocking him. We know all that from the Gospels. That's the earthly perspective. Okay? That's what we have to go through, right? So when we're going and we're living in this world and we're saying, oh, God, what are we going to do here? Because that's how it feels sometimes, right? We think about the powerful people in this world that rule nations, that are our bosses, or that are controlling various media, various things, and they're preaching evil. They're calling good evil, and they're calling evil good. And we're thinking, man, God, what are we going to do? Well, the fact is, there's nothing much we can do, right? And we recognize it. That's why it's an insurmountable obstacle to us. And what I want to get you to understand today is you don't have to worry about it. Yes, you're going to have to live through it. And yes, it may be pretty painful. There might be some sufferings. There might be persecution. There might be distress. There might be war. There might be famine. These are things that are like possibly on the horizon for us, right? I mean, people are talking about World War III. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a possibility. So from an earthly perspective, we may have to live through that stuff. But I want you to understand, and I want you to know now, before anything happens, know definitively God has conquered. You may individually suffer. You may individually die. But God has conquered. That's fact. And when it's recorded in heaven, it's not going to give us all the details. It's not going to talk about the suffering. It's just going to be God overcame. And he fixed it. That's awesome. All right. So let me break down this passage a little bit more. Let's talk about it. So the woman, well, who is that? I think it's pretty clear from the context. Let's look at Genesis chapter 37, verses 9 through 11. And I think it's going to describe who this woman is. The woman, I'm going to put it to you as she represents spiritual Israel. Okay? Now, on one hand, you might say, well, she represents Mary, right? Because she's giving birth to the child that we know as Christ. And I think that's true. She does represent Mary. And on one sense, she represents Eve, and that's why I had you, our brother, read Genesis 3, 14 through 15, because these passages are intimately connected, and I'm going to show you that in a second. So in one sense, she represents Eve, all of the mother of all. But really, she represents all of God's people throughout all time. Not Israel. I say spiritual Israel, right? Because not all of Israel is Israel, right? Paul teaches this in Romans. It's those who are faithful. Okay, so the faithful people of God throughout history, represented by Israel in a symbolic sense. Now, how do I know that? Well, Genesis chapter 37, verses 9 through 11. If you remember, this is when Joseph is having his dreams. He has two dreams. The dreams are identical. They just use different symbolism. And in this passage, he's going to recount the second dream. Okay, it says, then he dreamed still another dream. And he told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now, why do I reference this passage? Well, because it uses the exact same language that came out of Revelation. Chapter 12. It says the woman, right, she's clothed with the sun, the moon at her feet, and then the 12 stars. Now, here it has 11, but that's because Joseph isn't included. He's the 12th star. So it represents all of Israel, right? Okay. Well, who's the child? It's an easy one. If you've read the Bible, it just screams Jesus. You don't really need an interpretation here. But the Bible's just so clear, so we're going to give you an interpretation. If you go to Psalms chapter 2, it's going to make abundantly clear that the child here is Jesus Christ. Psalms chapter 2 is a messianic psalm. This morning, when our brother was teaching in Proverbs, I think we read in it was either verse 2 or 3, but it talked, he was saying, who might this be talking about? And it mentions a son, right? And we're like, this is one of the few passages in the Old Testament that talk about the Son of God. Well, here's another one. Here's one of the other few passages in the Old Testament that talk about the Son of God. Psalm chapter 2, verses 7 through 9. Actually, you guys, you need to go home and read the whole Psalm 2. It's only like 11 verses, so it won't take you long. It's awesome. Okay, it's awesome. And it's describing everything that's in Revelation chapter 12, by the way. But for the sake of time, 7 through 9, it says, I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Remember in Revelation 12 it says, this is the child who was to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Okay, that's pointing you back to this psalm so that you know who this is. This is the Son of God. All right, the dragon. Who is the dragon? I think it's clear. It screams Satan, and we know that. But the scripture is even more clear when it comes to Satan. Who is this guy? Well, it gives actually 4 descriptions of him, and one of them is Satan. If you just keep reading, we haven't read it yet, but in the passage, in Revelation 12 itself, if you skip down to verse 9, it says, so the great dragon was cast out. That serpent of old, who's that? Well, that's Genesis, the serpent in Genesis, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. he, in case you're unclear about who the dragon is, he gives 4 descriptors, and it's very obvious. I want you to know, like John, I want you to know in this vision that the guy who's been fighting us this whole time, remember the serpent, that serpent of old in Genesis? That was Satan. He was after us since then, and he's been after us this whole time. But I've overcome. Right? Like, that's the thing. Like, we know who our enemy is. It's Satan. But I've overcome him. I want you to know that. All right, let's continue on. Genesis chapter 3, 14 through 15. I bring this up because right from the get-go, God is letting both Satan and his people know that this is going to be the conflict throughout all the ages. And he's letting them know up front that he's going to win and Satan's going to be defeated. He says this. We read it this morning, so I won't read the whole passage, but goes down to the end. It says, I will put enmity between you and the woman. So he's speaking to Satan, right? This is Satan's punishment in the garden for what he did. He's speaking to Satan, and he says, I will put enmity between you and the woman. And then here's the important part. And between your seed and her seed. Now we know who her seed is. It's all of mankind, right? But who's Satan's seed? Well, we're going to find out. The Bible doesn't just use words and doesn't just write things in there for no purpose. The immediate next chapter is going to talk about this specific prophecy, and it's going to demonstrate what he means by it. So don't take my word for who is Satan's seed. We're going to find out. In chapter 4 of Genesis, story of Cain and Abel, right? You say, well, why does God put this? I mean, of all the things that God could have talked about, why does he talk about Cain and Abel? Why is this the very next thing? Well, it's because he's telling a story. God's setting us up. He's saying, look, I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, and that's what we see all throughout the Bible. If I had time, and by the way, I'm going to keep it short today. I told myself I was going to do that. But I can talk forever. If you ever need somebody, like you're just like, we need somebody to preach for 2 hours, call me up. I won't even have to prep for 2 hours. I'll just prep for 30, and it'll be 2 hours. I'm that kind of guy. Okay, back on topic. Genesis chapter 4, verse 7. It says, and if you do not do well, so this is God talking to Cain, right? He says, if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. And its desire is for you. Now, desire there harkens back to desire in chapter 3, and it means rule over. Sin wants to rule over you. And we know that's the case, right? We sin, and what does it call us in Romans chapter 6? We're slaves of sin. Sin rules over us. But it's only in Christ that those chains are broken and that we're freed from sin. All right, I'm getting off topic. Its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. So what we should do is rule over sin and not allow it in. Okay, that's Satan's tool. So here God is describing how Cain is becoming the son or the seed of Satan because he's allowing sin into his life to rule over him. The very next passage, or not the next passage, but later on in that story, Genesis chapter 4, verse 25, it says, in Adam, so we know what happened. Cain kills Abel. We're thinking, okay, Eve knows the prophecy. The seed's going to fight each other. There's going to be this battle, and she's thinking, well, I guess Satan won. But no. Verse 25 makes it clear, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, for God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. You would have thought that it would just said he provided another son for the one that was killed. And it does say that earlier in the passage, but, she bore a son and named him Seth. But it uses the word seed here because it wants you to hearken back to that prophecy. Yeah, Satan's going to attack you. And unfortunately, some people are going to be murdered by Satan's seed. His seed is going to murder some of the woman's seed. It's going to happen. But God will still always overcome. He will prepare another seed to take the place of the one that should have lived. We'll see this battle happen all throughout the Old Testament. I have a number 1 there because this is the first iteration of the battle. I prepared to talk about 8. I hid them all. So the next flight is okay. So it should be 8. I'm skipping them all because I want to get to the point. But it's great to trace this all throughout the Old Testament. By the way, there's far more than 8. The 8 that I chose just are like obvious, and they're just hanging there. They're low-hanging fruit. They're easy to talk about. But this battle rages. The battle between the seed of the woman and the seed of Satan, all throughout the Old Testament. And Satan's always trying to prevent that final seed. Because he knows, right, that final seed is going to crush his head. And so he's always trying to kill off God's anointed. All right, we get to number 8 in my list of battles here. Herod kills the infants, right? This is right before the birth of Christ. And it says in Matthew chapter 2, verse 16, it says, "Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men." So Herod does this just to stop Jesus. Remember, he tells the wise men, hey, go worship him. Hey, by the way, when you find him, come back, let me know so I can come worship him too. Like he's trying to be real subtle and sly. The wise men are warned by God, hey, look, don't do it. Go back another way. And they do that. When Herod learns that he's been had and that he's not going to find out, he's like, I know what I'll do. I'll just kill them all. That's incredible. This is the wickedness, right? Like if you have any doubt of whether Herod is Satan's seed, I hope this passage disabuses you of the notion that, yeah, he definitely is. Just in order to protect his power and his throne, he's like, I'm going to kill them all. I'll kill all the children. I don't know which one it is, so I'll just kill them all. And I'll just take care of the problem. That's his solution. Well, that's the battle that has raged from Genesis chapter 3 all the way to Matthew chapter 2. Well, it ends in Matthew chapter 2 because Jesus is born. He escapes. He's divinely warned by God. His parents flee to Egypt. It's an interesting lesson in that. And God overcomes. He just solves the problem. Every time he does it. Yes, sometimes there's some pain. There's some sorrow and suffering in it. Not denying any of that. I want you to know, and I want you to be prepared for that stuff. But I want you to know that eventually, God always wins. And he does it so easily. All right, so we talked about this battle between Satan's seed and the woman's seed. But then the next piece of it here is he. So it shifts from this like plural idea of the descendants of the woman and the descendants of Satan. And then it slips back into this direct you for Satan, because he's talking to Satan, you and he. Not plural, no longer plural, singular. It says, and between your seed and her seed, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So he's saying there's going to be an end to this cosmic battle throughout time. And this is what we see in the life of Jesus. It's Satan versus Jesus in the end. And of course, it's not really much of a versus. It's just Jesus kicking his butt. It's really unfair. But for the sake of, I guess if we drew up a poster, to celebrate, the UFC fight or the whatever boxing match, you'd put them up facing each other. But it's really, it's like a heavyweight versus, the women's division or something. I don't know. It's unmatched. And Jesus conquers. And he does it in such a fashion that when we get to Revelation chapter 12, he doesn't even tell how he did it. He's just like, and by the way, the child escaped and he was taken up to the throne of God. Because it's just a footnote in history as far as the facts and the details of it. The thing that matters is that Christ did overcome. And for us, in the New Testament, for us in the church, this is history. Satan's been defeated. This isn't future for us. For David, and Cain and Abel, and David, and the children that died from Herod, and all the people all the way through there, for them it was future. For us it's past. Like we should have nothing to worry about. Let's continue on. So we're going to continue in Revelation chapter 12, starting now in verse 7 and going through verse 11. It says, "And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for him in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven, 'Now salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to the death.'" So this is describing now, Jesus has defeated Satan. He gets kicked out of heaven. Gives us a lot of things to think about. There's a third of the stars. And interesting imagery here. And I have my thoughts on them, but we're not going to talk about it because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I'm here to give you the overarching theme. And the theme is found there towards the end when it says, "Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come." And Satan's been defeated. That's the main point here. All right, let's continue on. Verses 12 through 17, the end of the chapter there. It says, "Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them." Right, rejoice. The heavens are rejoicing because Satan's been kicked out. "But woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time, from the presence of the serpent. Now the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring." So she has other offspring, "who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." Who's her other offspring? Well, it's us. It's the church. And when Satan is defeated, guess what he does? Right? Like, he's enraged. And he knows it's done. He knows the battle's over. He lost the fight. The prize went to Jesus. And you can imagine, take the boxing metaphor that I was talking about earlier. The losing guy, he's so mad. And he knows he can't take this guy out, so what's he do? He goes up and beats people up on the street. He gets into fights out there because he's just mad. Because he knows he can't handle the real fight. So he goes and picks on the little guys. And that's what Satan does with us. He knows he can't handle God, but he's enraged. He just wants to destroy. He's lost, but it's not going to stop him from trying to knock stuff over and kick things and on his way out. And that's what he does. So he goes after us. So yes, there's going to be a little bit of suffering in this life. Expect it. Jesus said, "Those who follow me should expect suffering," right? We read 2 Timothy 3, 15 and 16, right? That's a really popular passage talking about the inspiration of the Bible. Right before it, it says, "Those who desire to live righteously are going to be persecuted." Okay, that's the verse we never read. We read the one talking about the inspiration of the Bible, which is great. The Bible is inspired. But if you read right before it, it tells us we're going to be persecuted. Yeah. Satan's going to fight us. He's going to come after us. And sometimes our troubles are going to seem insurmountable, right? Just like the woman. Right? It didn't seem like there was any way for her to get out of it. And sometimes it's going to seem like that for us. It's going to seem sometimes like Satan is one. Right? When we look at this world, we go, wow, it almost appears as if Satan has won. But he has not. I promise you that. John, in his letters to the churches, at the end of every church, he says, "To he who overcomes." Right? There's going to be problems. He's going to say, people are going to persecute you. Jezebel's going to persecute you. The Nicolaitans are going to come after you. the Jews who are really Satan's synagogue, they're going to oppose you. But to he who overcomes, and for each church, all 7 churches, he gives a different reward that he's going to give them. But when you take all those rewards together and you take it to the end of Revelation, it describes the New Jerusalem. All of them describe the New Jerusalem. And he says, to you who overcome are going to get that. You're going to get that reward. You're going to get to go to the New Jerusalem. Be with God. And so that I hope that was encouraging for you today. When things get bad in your life, and they will at some point, if they're not already right now, with the new year, everybody was like dreading 2024, and you have all these memes on the internet about how terrible 2024 is going to be. Look, if you're worried about it, take a step back, get some godly perspective, understand that the problems are not insurmountable, and that God's already taken care of them, and then he's going to get us through it. With that, the lesson is yours. Only thing I would encourage you to do is, if you're not already on God's side, if you haven't been baptized into Christ, been clothed with Christ, and taken on his righteousness, if you haven't done that yet, you're on the other side. You're on the losing side. And I would just encourage you to, as we stand and sing, to come forward so that we can baptize you into Christ and make you one of God's people.